My name is Haley, and I never imagined I'd be standing here, staring at the broken pieces of everything I believed in. It started on one of those restless nights when the city hum felt too loud, like it was mocking me. I was coming home from another late shift at the diner, my hands still sticky with syrup and coffee grounds, when I noticed the hallway light under my apartment door flickering. My pulse quickened, that familiar squeeze in my chest, like a cold fist clenching around my heart. I fumbled with my keys, each click echoing in the silent corridor, and pushed the door open. Inside, the air tasted different, stale, almost metallic. My stomach churned as I stepped over something on the threshold. Papers, scattered across the floor like a confession. I knelt, fingertips grazing an envelope addressed to me in barely legible handwriting. My breath hitched, throat suddenly dry. I slid it open, heart hammering, and pulled out a photograph. It was us, me and Jake, laughing by the lake last summer, sun glinting off the water, oblivious to anything but each other. But this picture wasn't meant to make me smile. Someone had scrawled words on the back, "You were never hers." My vision blurred, and I blinked hard, tasting bile at the back of my throat. My hands trembled so violently I dropped the photo, shattering the moment like glass. I stood, limbs unsteady, and scanned the living room. The couch was torn, cushions flung aside as if in a frantic search. My coffee table lay overturned, magazines fanned out in a chaotic swirl. And there, on the wall I'd painted myself, hung another frame. I swear my legs went numb when I saw it, a collage of my private messages, screen grabs of our late-night texts, laughter emojis trailing down like breadcrumbs of some cruel trail. I pressed my hand to my mouth, stifling a sob that shook my whole body. My pulse raced so fast I thought it might burst through my ribcage. Behind me, I heard the soft click of a door shutting. My spine coiled, every muscle tensing. I turned to see Emily, my roommate and best friend, leaning against the kitchen doorframe, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Her hair was in a loose ponytail, strands falling around her face, but her lips were pressed into a line I'd never seen before. "I found these while I was cleaning up," she said, voice calm but distant, like she was reciting lines she'd practiced. My mind scrambled, trying to connect her tone with the devastation before me. "Looked like you needed to know." I swallowed, fingers clutching the edge of the couch. My mouth went dry, and I forced out words that felt foreign. "Know what, Em?" My voice cracked, betraying me. My cheeks burned. She didn't look away. "That you've been set up," she said, and the words landed like stones in my chest. "Jake's been meeting someone else. 4 months." She motioned to the papers, bank statements, hotel receipts, secret phone logs, and I felt my knees give way. I dropped to the floor, my palms pressed to my ears as if I could block out the truth. Emily knelt beside me, but there was no comfort in her touch. Instead, I felt a cold dread seep in, creeping under my skin. How had I missed all the signs? The late texts he shrugged off, the unexplained weekends away. And all this time I'd believed him when he promised there was nothing to worry about. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath. My heart pounded in my throat, tears tracking warmth down my cheeks. The betrayal wasn't just his, it was hers, too. My best friend, the one person I trusted more than anyone. A low, ragged laugh escaped me, tinged with disbelief and sorrow. "You played me," I whispered, voice hollow. Emily said nothing, but I could see her guilt in the tightness around her eyes. And in that moment, something shifted in me. The pain sharpened into something harder, rage, icy and bright. I stood abruptly, knocking over a lamp that crashed to the floor and shattered. The sound snapped through the apartment like gunfire. Emily flinched. "I need to see him," I said, voice steady despite the whirlwind inside me. "Tonight." She nodded, hesitation flickering before she turned and walked to her room without another word. I sank onto the edge of my unmade bed, trembling hands twisting the hem of my shirt. My chest felt like it might rupture from the pressure, the betrayal, the anger, the aching hole in my trust. But beneath it all, a cold determination began to take shape. I would confront Jake. I would make them both face what they did. And I wouldn't stop until I understood why, and until they felt a fraction of the fracture they'd carved into me. Because this shattered mess, was only the beginning. Because this shattered mess, was only the beginning. I yanked my phone from my pocket, fingers brushing against its cold metal until I found Jake's name in my call log. My thumb hovered, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. I hesitated, breath catching in my throat, then pressed call and held the device to my ear. The dial tone thrummed in my ear, each second stretching taut like a wire. I closed my eyes, recalling the way his voice used to warm me, only to be met with a clipped, "Hey." His tone was distant, caught somewhere between surprise and guarded calm. "Where are you?" I managed to whisper, voice trembling. "Out," he said, as if that explained everything. "Busy. I'll call you later." And with that, he ended the call, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my own living room. My legs buckled, I slid down the wall, knees digging into the carpet. My chest heaved as a sob tore out of me, raw and ragged. My hands tightened into fists, nails pressing into my palms until the pain scorched away the blur of tears. I stayed there for a long moment, chest contracting, mind racing through every moment I'd ever believed in him. Every promise he'd whispered, every plan we'd made. It all felt like tricks, like illusions he'd spun around me. A slow, cold fury began to burn through my veins, sharper than any hurt. I wiped my cheeks on the back of my hand and stood, shaking, determined. I would find him. I would make him answer for this. I grabbed my jacket, jeans and boots, something sturdy, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frames seemed to rattle. The hallway light was still flickering, and the chill in the air felt good against my heated skin. My breath puffed in short bursts as I descended the stairs two at a time, adrenaline pushing me forward. Outside, the city throbbed with late-night energy, distant sirens, muffled laughter drifting from a nearby club, the rumble of cars. I hailed a cab with a hand that shook so violently I almost missed the driver's eye. "Downtown, Cedar and Fifth," I rasped, sliding onto the cracked leather seat. The driver didn't ask questions. I must have looked like I'd run through hell. He nodded and pulled away. The journey felt endless, every stoplight a fresh moment of panic. My phone buzzed, Emily texting, "Be careful." I stared at the words, thumb hovering over reply, but I swallowed down the impulse. I needed to do this alone. I typed "I will" and hit send without looking. My mind was a storm of anger and grief, thoughts colliding until there was no room for anything else. When the cab pulled up at Cedar and Fifth, neon lights from a dive bar flickered over me. Jake's usual haunt. I paid without waiting for change and stomped inside. The air smelled of stale beer and something burnt. I scanned the patrons, jumping from one face to the next, until I saw him, slouched on a bar stool, laughter in his eyes as a woman leaned in close, her hand on his shoulder. My breath hitched so hard I thought I might choke. The jukebox somewhere spat out a lazy song, but I heard only the thud of my heartbeat. I crossed the room in a few long strides, each step echoing in my ears. He looked up, confusion flashing across his face. The woman's hand slid away, and she backed off, sensing the tension. I stopped a foot behind him. My voice was low, trembling but sharp. "I need answers." He stood, eyes widening. "Haley." "Don't," I snapped, and all at once the room seemed to tilt. Condemnation burned my gaze. "You lied. You cheated. You used me." My voice cracked, and I swallowed, tasting rust. "Why?" The bar fell silent, everyone shifting to watch, sensing the confrontation. Jake ran a hand through his hair, lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. His eyes flicked to the woman, guilt flashing, then back to me. I didn't mean for it to go on," he stammered. "It just happened." "That's your excuse?" I laughed, bitter and hollow. My hands clenched at my sides until my fingernails dug into my palms. Pain jolted up my arms, anchoring me to the moment. "Happened?" You think I'm stupid? He shook his head, voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I stared at him, tears blurring my vision. Anger roiled beneath my skin, hotter than any grief. And in that instant, I knew I wouldn't walk away. Not this time. Not after everything. I took a slow breath, letting the tremor settle into a cold calm. I want you to feel this, I said softly, so low he had to lean in. Every second of it. And then I turned away, leaving him frozen as I walked back through the crowd, each step heavy with purpose. Outside, the night air was a welcome slap, and I realized then, this confrontation was only the prelude. The real reckoning was yet to come. My chest tightened with every step as I left the neon glare behind. The night had turned cold and damp, the city's humidity clinging to my skin like guilt. I drifted under the streetlights, mind racing. I knew that to hurt them the way they hurt me, I needed proof, something undeniable that would cut him deep and leave no escape. I returned to my apartment, still reeling from the confrontation. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my keys again. Inside, I flicked on the lamp and sat at my small oak desk, breathing unevenly. My laptop lay open, the screen waiting like an accusation. I clicked through the folders I'd made in secret, things I'd collected since I found those receipts in the living room. Every photo, every text, every receipt. There it was. First, a message thread I'd screenshotted without him noticing. I opened the image and stared at the glowing text. Screenshot of a text message, I miss you already. See you tonight. Hugs and kisses, sent at 2 a.m. between Jake and her. My breath caught in my throat. The words hovered in the air like a dagger. I pressed my palm to my mouth, teeth clenched, tasting metal. My jaw locked as the weight settled in my bones. That message, proof that he'd lied to me the night I waited up, staring at my phone until it went black. I scrolled further and found a photograph I'd downloaded months ago, buried under innocence. Photo of Jake hugging the other woman at a friend's party, their faces pressed close, smiles wide as if plotting some private victory. I stared at the picture until my vision blurred, every fine detail etched into my mind, the twist of his hair, the way her cheek flushed in the flash. My stomach turned, and I felt bile rise, but beneath that, something else burned, pure, icy resolve. I closed the laptop and rose, each movement deliberate. My heart pounded so loud I could almost hear it in the quiet room. I steadied my breathing, chest rising and falling in controlled bursts. I forced myself to think, this was only the beginning. With these, I had the ammo I needed to dismantle him. I grabbed a small black notebook from the shelf, my project, as I'd started to call it. Inside I'd scribbled plans, confrontations, public exposures, moments designed to fracture his facade. Every idea had a date and a location, vague enough that no one could pin me, but precise enough for me to act. I tapped the side of the notebook, feeling the rough edge of pages beneath my fingertips. My throat went dry as I reviewed the first plan. Send those proofs anonymously to his work. Imagine his face when he found an envelope on his desk with no return address, only the evidence of his betrayal. Then watch as his colleagues whispered and he realized how easily trust could shatter. A flicker of hesitation washed over me. What if I went too far? A tremor snaked through my limbs, and I closed my eyes. But no, he'd gone too far first. He'd stolen my trust, my nights, my laughter. I would tip the scales. I scribbled a note at the top of the page, Operation Reflection. Under it, the first steps: print copies of proof, acquire envelopes, obtain stamps. Nothing illegal, just uncomfortably personal. A message that this wasn't over. I slipped on my coat and locked the door behind me, heart hammering. The cool air hit me, sobering and sharp, and I felt alive in a way I hadn't before. My pulse settled into a steady rhythm, and I realized I was smiling, a small, dangerous smile. Tonight, I would begin. And tomorrow, they'd wake to the mirror I'd set up for them. I walked the few blocks to the print shop with my heart hammering so loud I thought the walls might shake. The neon sign above the door buzzed faintly, its blue light flickering against the crusted snow on the sidewalk. Inside, the smell of toner and paper dust hit me like cold water. I approached the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need 20 color prints of these," I said, sliding the folder forward. The clerk glanced at the folder, shrugged, and started feeding pages into the copier without a word. As the machine whirred, I tapped the notebook's cover against my palm, feeling each page's promise of exposure. My breath came in shallow bursts. When the copies spat out, crisp and identical, I sorted them into neat piles on the counter. "Also 20 standard white envelopes and stamps," I added. The clerk slid a bundle of envelopes over and pointed to a rack of stamps. I peeled off 20, affixing each one with deliberate care, imagining the moment Jake and his coworkers would find those envelopes on their desks. My evidence, my truth, delivered without a name. I counted out the exact amount at the register, sliding bills across. The clerk barely looked up. I think I could be anyone in that shop, and he'd treat me the same. I tucked the envelopes into my coat pocket, feeling their weight settle against my hip. The snowflakes outside had turned to a thick sleet, and I braced myself against the wind as I stepped back onto the street. My cheeks burned from the cold, but beneath that burn was something hotter: anticipation. A block away, I ducked into the corner convenience store. The fluorescent lights were harsh, and the air inside smelled of sanitizer and old coffee. I pulled out my phone and double-checked the addresses. Jake Harris, 12th floor, Eastbrook Financial. Each envelope was stamped with the same name and the company's address. I slid my finger over the window envelope, the one that would land on his boss's desk. I pictured his face when he saw my handwriting there: shock, guilt, panic. Back on the sidewalk, I spotted the gray USPS drop box at the end of the block. It stood under a flickering street lamp, a hulking metal promise. I approached quietly, casting glances up and down the empty street. No witnesses. I dropped each envelope into the slot with a soft thud, my heart skipping at each one. When the last envelope slid through, the metal clunk felt like the final locking of a door. I stood for a moment, listening to my own breath, watching the envelopes disappear into darkness. I turned and hurried back toward home, the adrenaline making my legs move faster than I expected. Every shadow seemed to reach for me, every distant sound set my pulse racing. But I welcomed it. This was the rush of someone who'd crossed a line and couldn't turn back. By the time I reached my building, my palms were slick, and I could feel the tremor in my lips. I unlocked the door with shaking fingers, stepped inside, and locked it behind me like a vow. At the small desk in my living room, I spread out the copies I'd kept, a stack of screenshots and photos printed in sharp detail. I touched the glossy surface of one image, the text thread flashing across the screen with its midnight timestamp. My chest tightened. I closed my eyes and let the scene replay: his laughter with her, her hand on his arm, the careless way he smiled. I pressed the photo against my heart, feeling the weight of every lie. I sank onto the couch, exhaustion pulling at my limbs. Outside, the wind rattled the windows as if whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. I glanced at my phone. No new messages from Jake, no calls from Emily. Silence. But I knew that silence would break soon, and when it did, my envelopes would speak louder than any apology. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself and exhaled, letting the tension ease just enough for sleep to edge in. My eyes fluttered open to the dull gray light filtering through the blinds. My heart thudded against my ribcage, a warning that the night's work was far from over. I lay still, shoulders tense, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside my window. The envelopes I'd dropped into that mailbox hours ago were now in motion, slipping through hands and scanners, on their way to him, to everyone. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, feeling the weight of anticipation pressing down like a physical force. I rose and moved through the small apartment in a haze, stepping over the papers I'd spread out the night before. Each printout felt like a wound, raw and unhealed. I poured coffee from the pot I'd left brewing, the steam warming my cold fingers. The mug felt heavy in my hand as I carried it to the desk, where the proofs lay stacked in neat piles: messages, photos, receipts. I stared at them, my reflection ghosting on the glossy surface of the photos, and I realized I no longer recognized that person. The hurt girl who cried in the bar had been replaced by someone harder, someone shaped by betrayal and resolve. The phone vibrated on the desk, jolting me. I glanced at the screen and saw Jake's name flashing. My pulse spiked, and color drained from my cheeks. I hesitated, thumb hovering over ignore. Then I let it go to voicemail. Better he didn't hear me breathe right now. I settled back into the chair, coffee cooling in the mug. The thought that he might already know, that his boss or his colleagues could be reading his betrayal before he even blinked, sent a thrill through me, laced with a darker fear I wouldn't admit. 10 minutes later, the low buzz of my own phone startled me again. A text from Emily. Have you heard anything? Are you okay? My chest contracted with guilt. I typed back, I'm fine. Trust me. And hit send before I could second guess. Emily deserved better than vague answers, but I needed her out of the storm's eye until I was certain of its shape. By mid-morning, my nerves had frayed thin. My fingers drummed against the desktop as I stared at the clock on the wall, refusing to watch the minutes crawl. Was there a shred of doubt? A cold part of me wondered if he would dismiss the envelopes as some prank. But the receipts, the timestamps, the pay stubs, they were irrefutable. I sipped the coffee, tasting bitterness beyond the beans. Then the first message arrived. Not from him, but from someone at his company. A simple text, did you send this? Attached was a photo of one of my envelopes, slashed open, its contents spread like evidence on a desk. Underneath, the message, your handwriting. You're way more bold than I imagined. My breath caught. My skin prickled with adrenaline. Someone had found the source. Panic knotted my stomach. Had I been sloppy? The envelope was anonymous, but the note had my handwriting, my bold script. My pulse raced as I realized the danger. Not only would he know, but now his allies did too. I set the mug down hard, splashing cold coffee across the desk. The aftermath arrived in waves. Calls from unknown numbers, emails forwarded to Emily. She had received them despite my warning. My sanctuary was breached. I felt sick, hot tears stinging my eyes. It was too much, too fast. I sank into the desk chair, head in hands, body shaking. The power I'd felt last night evaporated, replaced by raw fear. I'd aimed to ruin him. I had not expected collateral damage so immediate, nor my own ruin so near. I pressed my forehead to the cool desktop, drawing in ragged breaths. The world outside continued its indifferent rhythm, cars honking, a neighbor's dog barking. But inside me, chaos reigned. I had set a trap, and now I was caught in its teeth. My vision blurred with tears and sweat. I closed my eyes and let the panic surge, a hurricane I could neither flee nor quell. When the tremors in my limbs subsided, a strange calm settled over me. The ruin I'd unleashed upon his life had begun to claw back at me. I realized then, revenge was not a path to peace but a mirror reflecting each shard of my broken heart. Yet I could not stop. I sat up, wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt, and opened my notebook, Operation Reflection, waiting for its next command. The lines I'd drawn before seemed small now, child's play compared to the storm I'd conjured. I touched the pen to paper, ink sinking into the page. My hand steadied as I began to write. If the first strike had exposed him, the second needed to protect me. I needed a plan not just to harm, but to survive. To shape the story so that, when the final pieces fell, I would be the author of my own fate, not just the architect of his downfall. That night, I closed the notebook with a soft thud, each page a promise I was determined to keep. The mirror might reflect my shatters, but I would gather them, forge them into something stronger. And tomorrow, when the next phase began, would no longer just be the betrayed. I curled up on the edge of my bed, the notebook open on my lap, heart still pounding from the morning's fallout. My breath caught in my throat each time I thought of that text, your handwriting. You're way more bold than I imagined. I pressed my fingertips against my temples, trying to block out the swirl of panic and shame. But then I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, anchoring each exhale. "It's not over," I whispered, voice hoarse. My jaw felt tight, like I'd been clenching my teeth for hours. I closed the notebook and slid it into the pocket of my jeans. I needed a plan, one that didn't rely on anonymity or envelopes that could betray me. I needed to protect myself before I could strike again. I stood and paced across the threadbare rug, each step measured. The apartment felt too small now, the walls closing in with every memory of what I'd done. My phone buzzed, a news alert about a data breach somewhere across town. I paused, mind flickering. Data. Information. That was it. I could use digital shadows instead of my own hand. I peered down at my phone, thumb hovering over the contacts list. Emily's name stared back at me. I hesitated, thumb trembling. Our friendship felt broken, but she was the only person I trusted enough to keep an ally. I tapped her name and held the call, heat rising to my cheeks. "Hey," her voice sounded tentative, worried. I said, voice low, "I need help. Please." My hands shook so badly I had to grip the phone tight. I'm in over my head." There was a pause. Then, "Tell me what's going on." I swallowed hard, the old familiar knot in my stomach. They know it was me. My handwriting. The envelopes. I can't, my voice cracked, and I swallowed more saliva than felt natural. "I need to cover my tracks." "How?" she asked softly. "I need someone tech-savvy. Someone who can scrub any trace of those envelopes, maybe redirect the fallout. You know, like flip it back on him." I let out a shaky laugh. "I feel crazy saying this." "Not crazy," she murmured. "I know someone. But it's risky." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "I'll do it." We agreed to meet later that night at her place, just a block over, where I'd lay out everything. I hung up and sank onto the couch, limbs heavy. The adrenaline had drained, leaving raw exhaustion. I pressed my hands to my face, jaw unlocking as tears threatened. But I forced them back. No tears. Not yet. That evening, I trudged the few steps to Emily's loft. The building smelled like old wood and rain. Emily opened the door before I could knock, eyes red, hair loose around her shoulders. Without a word, she ushered me inside. The living room was dim, lit by a single lamp. She closed the door and leaned against it, arms crossed. "You got the laptop?" she asked. "Yeah." I pulled it from my bag, setting it on the coffee table. My fingers hesitated above the keyboard. "Everything's in here," email threads, scanned photos, the notebook plan. I tapped the case. "Operation Reflection." She exhaled. "We'll need to set up a burner account, route through VPNs. I can help mask the IP, but we'll have to be careful." My chest tightened. "I don't want to go to jail, Em." "Not if we do this right," she said, soft but firm. "First, we'll transfer the files to a secure cloud. Then I'll draft an email, anonymous, with the same proofs, but this time to his private contacts. Friends, family. It'll look like someone who truly loved him, exposing everything before disappearing." I leaned forward, the details snapping into focus. My hand steadied as I imagined the fallout, his sister reading the messages, his mother finding the receipts, the shame spreading through his world. The thought sent a thrill of grim satisfaction through me, mixed with guilt so sharp it seared my chest. "This is brutal," I said, voice hushed. She shrugged. "He did this to you. You deserve truth." I nodded, head heavy. "Okay." For the next hour, we worked in tense silence. Emily guided me through VPN setups, new email creation, encrypting files. I watched as my own betrayal transformed into digital weaponry, proofs packaged for maximum impact. My pulse raced, every step forward tightening the coil of resolve in my gut. When we finished, Emily handed me a small USB drive. Plug this in, open the letter draft, attach the files, and send. Then we walk away. I stared at it, my reflection ghosting in its metal surface. My hands shook as I took it. Tonight? Tonight, she confirmed. I slipped the drive into my pocket, stomach nodding. Outside, the city lights glowed like distant embers. I took a deep breath, feeling both fear and power swirl inside me. This was it, the next phase. No scribbled envelopes, no handwriting to betray me. Just a click, and their world would fracture all over again. I stood, shoulders straightening. "Thank you," I whispered to Emily. She nodded, eyes grave. "Be careful." I stepped back into the night, the USB drive pressing against my hip. The rain had started again, cool drops splattering the pavement. I lifted my face to the sky and let the water run down my cheeks. Not tears, rain. I wrapped my coat tighter, heart steady with purpose. The digital storm was coming. And this time, there'd be no trace of me in the wreckage. I slipped the USB drive into my pocket and headed back to my apartment, the rain still drumming on the pavement like an impatient heartbeat. My coat clung to me, cold and damp, but I hardly noticed. Inside, I locked the door behind me and flicked on the lamp at my desk, its yellow glow cutting through the gloom. My laptop sat open, the blank draft email waiting like a loaded gun. I sat down gingerly, chest tightening at the thought of what I was about to do. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I inhaled slowly, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline. Outside, the city's hum felt distant, like I was submerged underwater, everything muffled except my own pulse. I reached into my pocket, my hand brushing the cool metal of the drive. My breath caught, and for a fraction of a second, doubt crept in. What if I was crossing a line I couldn't come back from? But then I remembered his laughter with her, the ease with which he'd lied, and the betrayal that had radiated through my bones. My jaw clenched, and I forced the doubt away. This was necessary. I slid the drive into my laptop's port, a small chime confirmed it was read. My screen lit up with the files, screenshots of furtive messages, photos of whispered embraces, that ugly receipt trail. I clicked to attach them all. Emily's instructions replayed in my mind, write it like someone who loved him most, then vanished. So I began to type. Jake. I loved you with everything I had. I trusted you with my nights, my secrets, my dreams. But you broke me. These attachments are the proof of your betrayal. I don't want your pity or your apologies. What you did is beyond repair. I'm moving on, but you need to live with this. Everyone who matters to you should see what you are. Goodbye. My fingers trembled as I finished, the words feeling like shards of glass under my skin. I signed it simply, H, and stared at the email, cursor blinking. My heart pounded so fiercely I thought it might burst. I imagined the shock in his mother's eyes, the hurt in his sister's voice, the gossip that would ripple through his friends. I hesitated only a moment before clicking send. The whoosh of the email leaving my outbox echoed in the room. My shoulders slumped as the tension draining from me left a hollow ache behind. I closed the laptop lid and leaned back, letting the chair creak under my weight. Silence settled around me, thick and expectant. My chest felt empty, like I'd poured every shard of my broken heart into that message. A low tremor rippled through my arms, and I wrapped my arms around myself, pressing my palms into my ribcage as if I could hold my pieces together. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. Time crawled. I stared at the closed laptop as if it might spring open with news of the fallout. My phone lay on the desk, buzzing against the wood. I picked it up and saw dozens of notifications, replies, forwarded emails, voicemails. But I resisted. I needed a moment before I faced the storm I'd unleashed. I wandered to the window and looked out at the slick street below. The neon signs from the corner bar refracted in the puddles, colors bleeding into each other. A car splashed through a shallow pool, and I flinched, heart stuttering. How many lives would this ruin? How many confidences would shatter? Regret tugged at the edge of my resolve, but I pushed it back. My limbs felt both drained and electric, drained from the weight of what I'd done, electric with the power of my own agency. I closed my eyes and pressed my forehead against the cold glass, feeling the vibration of passing cars beneath my palms. The city was alive around me, oblivious to my personal reckoning. Eventually, I turned away and sank onto the couch, the notebook from earlier resting on the coffee table like an old friend. I picked it up, traced the title, Operation Reflection, and flipped to blank pages. I ran a finger down the margin, remembered Emily's parting words, "Be careful." I closed my eyes and exhaled, long and low. I'd crossed a threshold tonight. I'd transformed pain into action, shattered trust into truth. Now there was only waiting. Waiting for the waves to break, for his world to fracture, for the fallout to rain down. And when it did, I'd be ready. Because this digital storm, was the next turning point. The real test of whether I could rebuild from the wreckage or be consumed by it. I curled up on the couch, the rain's rhythm lulling me into a fragile calm. Tomorrow, the storm would break. But tonight, I let the silence hold me, a brief refuge before the reckoning. I woke to my phone buzzing like an alarm in my ear, the morning light bleeding through my curtains. My heart slammed so hard I nearly flinched awake. I lay there, breath caught, as the screen lit up with message after message, emails forwarded, voicemails, angry texts, worried calls. The digital storm I'd unleashed was no longer abstract, it was crashing down all around me. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, limbs heavy, and pressed play on the first voicemail. Jake's voice, ragged and low, "Haley, what the hell did you do?" Then static. I dropped the phone, hands shaking as tears pooled in my eyes. My chest tightened, guilt and fear coiling inside me like a living thing. I pressed my palms to my temples, trying to steady my racing thoughts. A knock at the door jolted me upright. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't even considered Emily, or anyone, showing up. I crept to the peephole, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the chain lock, before clicking it open. She stepped in without a word, eyes rimmed red, umbrella dripping on the floor. "I saw the news," she said quietly, voice trembling. "It's everywhere. His office, his social, even his mom posted about it." She sank onto the couch, wrapping her arms around herself. Guilt flared inside me. I'd sworn to protect her, but now she was caught in the fallout too. I sat beside her, words stuck in my throat. Finally, I whispered, "I didn't think it would spread so fast." My voice wavered. The memory of clicking send felt miles away, like someone else's act. I thought anonymity would hold. Emily shook her head, hair tumbling forward. "He's furious. You should hide." The words hit me like a fist. Hide. I stared at her, chest pounding. Hiding meant admitting defeat, retreating into fear. But staying meant facing the consequences, legal risks, personal ruin, maybe even violence from someone cornered. My phone buzzed again, a group text from his sister, "Please talk to us. We're worried." Another from his boss, "HR needs a statement." I pressed my palms to my face. The walls of my apartment felt too thin, each buzz echoed like an accusation. Emily reached out, hand hovering over mine. "What's next?" she asked, voice soft but insistent. I closed my eyes, drawing in a shaky breath. My mind raced through every possible move, each more desperate than the last. Fleeing crossed my thoughts, but the city was so vast, could I disappear? Or would I be driving straight into more danger? When I opened my eyes, my vision was clearer. "I'm not running," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "I need to face this, but on my terms." Emily studied me, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. I added quickly, "But I need a plan, legal, public, whatever it takes." My jaw clenched. "I won't let him, or them, shape the narrative." Her shoulders eased. "Okay. We'll find someone who can help. Maybe a lawyer friend of mine." Relief warmed through me, though fear still skittered beneath my skin. We spent hours on the phone, reaching out to contacts, drafting statements, preparing for damage control. I mapped out every conversation, rehearsed each apology and justification until my cheeks ached. The weight of the evidence I'd sent, screenshots, receipts, photos, hung over me like a noose. Now each piece I'd used as a weapon could be turned against me. By late afternoon, I sat at my desk again, the laptop open to a blank document. I stared at the cursor blinking, my fingers poised above the keys. I needed to tell my side, my pain, my reason, my regret if it came to that. But more than anything, I needed to reclaim my voice before everyone else did. I started typing, a statement to his family, to HR, to anyone who'd listen. Words spilled out, betrayal, heartbreak, the sleepless nights, the trembling hands, the desperate need for truth. I wrote until my vision blurred, then kept going. Each sentence felt like sewing my heart back together, stitch by trembling stitch. When I finally looked up, the sky beyond the window had turned a bruised purple. The city lights blinked on, one by one. Emily leaned against the doorframe, watching me. I closed the laptop and met her gaze. There was no going back, but maybe this was the real reckoning, not just what I'd done to him, but what I had to do to myself. I stood, legs unsteady, and walked to the window. The rain had started again, pattering against the glass. I pressed my forehead to it, feeling the tremble in my limbs. The storm outside matched the one inside me, but for the first time, I didn't feel entirely lost within it. "This ends tonight," I whispered, more to myself than to anyone. Emily's nod was gentle, resolute. Together, we would step into the fallout and face whatever came, no longer as avenger and ally, but as two women bound by the truth, ready to rebuild from the wreckage. My heart was still pounding when I slipped out of my apartment, the evening air cool against my sweat-slick skin. Emily met me outside the building, her umbrella folded against her shoulder like a silent flag of solidarity. We didn't speak as we walked to the car, every footstep felt heavy, the pavement humming beneath us. I gripped the door handle so hard my knuckles whitened. Inside, I slid into the passenger seat and exhaled, letting the city lights blur by as we drove toward the law firm. I'd never been in a place like that before, a lobby of marble floors and brushed steel accents, the faint scent of leather and expensive coffee in the air. My stomach churned as I signed in with the receptionist, who didn't look up from her phone. Emily guided me to a glass-walled conference room where a woman in a tailored suit waited, her posture calm and steady. She introduced herself as Laura. Laura held out her hand, her grip firm but not unkind. "Haley, Emily told me everything," she said, and my throat closed at the weight of that word, everything. In the hush of that room, I felt exposed, like all my secrets were written on the walls. I sank into the leather chair across from her. My back felt too straight, my limbs too tense. Laura slid a folder toward me. "This is your draft statement," she said. "We'll refine it, make sure it covers your rights, anticipates their defenses." I opened the folder and saw my own words printed on crisp pages. The sentences felt unfamiliar, like someone else's story. My chest tightened as I read about betrayal, heartbreak, and exposure, all the things I'd unleashed. "I'm ready to tell my side," I whispered, fingers brushing the paper. My voice trembled. Laura nodded and steepled her fingers. "Good. We'll start with the email chain, the witnesses, and your emotional state. It's important to show how this affected you, so they can't dismiss it as simple revenge." I swallowed, tasting metal. The idea of vulnerability in a room full of legal minds made me queasy. I was terrified," I said, voice low. I thought anonymity would protect me, but then I realized I needed to stand behind my truth. Emily reached over and squeezed my hand. My pulse spiked at her touch, solid, grounding. We worked through every line, punctuating the statement with details of my sleepless nights, the tremors in my hands, the way my throat went dry every time I saw his name pop up on my phone. Each description felt like reliving the betrayal, but also like carving it into reality so there was no denying its existence. When we finished, Laura printed copies. I folded one and slipped it into my coat pocket. The others went back into the folder, to be delivered to HR and to Jake's attorney tomorrow. I sat back, exhausted. The adrenaline had drained, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. Lara gave me a small, professional smile. "You did well today. Now we prepare for their response." Leaving the firm, the city felt different, sharper, more immediate. Every neon sign, every honk and hum seemed to echo with possibility. Emily and I walked toward the subway, not speaking. I realized how tired I was, my legs felt like lead. At the station, the train's roar felt like a promise of momentum, taking me away from this moment or deeper into it. I chose to step on. We rode in silence to my stop, the carriage nearly empty. I pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching passing lights smear into lines. My reflection hovered there, eyes rimmed with fatigue, shoulders stooped from weeks of tension. But beneath that, something else gleamed, a spark of resolve. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming myself. At my building, I paused under the flickering hallway light. Emily gave me a look, equal parts concern and pride. I nodded, offering the briefest of thanks. Inside my apartment, I closed the door and let it thud behind me, as if sealing off doubt. I went straight to the desk and opened the window a crack. The night air rushed in, carrying distant laughter and the sigh of a siren. I leaned out, resting my arms on the sill, and let the tension drain from my shoulders. I stared down at the street, imagining the storm whose eye I'd just entered. Tomorrow, I'd deliver my statement. Tomorrow, they'd have to hear me, not as a shadow behind anonymous letters, but as a woman demanding to be seen. My reflection in the glass became my witness, a girl forged by betrayal, tempered by courage. I closed the window and clicked off the lamp, leaving the notebook and folder on the desk like markers of battles fought. As I crawled into bed, the city's pulse still thrummed through the walls. My chest settled into a steady rhythm, my breathing soft and even. The fallout was still to come, but for the first time in weeks, I felt ready. The mirror of my devastation had shown me every shard, now it would show me how I could piece them back together. And when the dawn broke, I would stand in the light of my own making. When the cold early light slipped under my blinds, I felt the weight of tomorrow press against my chest. The statement I'd handed over sat in Lara's file now, every line scrutinized, every confession framed as evidence. It felt surreal to trust someone else with my truth. I lay still, feeling the mattress dip beneath me like a confession booth swallowing my secrets. My fingers trembled, brushing the sheet, and I realized my nails had bitten into my palms during the night. I pushed myself up and reached for my phone, heart thudding so hard it echoed in my ears. There were no missed calls, only a silent screen and a single email notification blinking hope and dread at once. I tapped my inbox, stomach twisting. It was HR. The subject line read, "Request for follow-up." My breath caught. I opened it with shaking thumbs. They wanted more details, a timestamp for every message, contact information for each recipient. Essentially, they were building a dossier against me. My throat tightened, and I needed air. I threw back the covers and stood, jaw locked, breathing shallow. Panic fluttered through my limbs, hot and cold. I paced the room, every footstep dragging guilt and resolve in its wake. Emily found me by the window, leaning against the sill, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. I must have startled her because she turned, eyes wide. "They want more?" she asked. My voice came out rough, like gravel. "Yeah. They need attachments, context, everything. It's like I handed them a grenade and they want me to pull the pin." She nodded slowly and offered the mug. The warm ceramic burned my palms but steadied my grip. I took a sip, tasting bitterness and the faint hope in Emily's steady gaze. "We'll get Lara on it," she said. "She'll know how to tighten this without giving them ammo." I knew she was right, but a hollow part of me recoiled. Every detail I gave was another piece of my life laid bare. I took another swallow, feeling the warmth bloom in my chest. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Lara in her office, walls lined with law books and framed certifications. She listened as I recounted dates and times, reciting details until a headache bloomed behind my eyes. My voice shook, mouth dry as dust. I pressed a damp tissue to my forehead, heart pounding like a drum. Laura typed notes, then leaned back. "We'll refine this," she said, voice calm. "By tomorrow, we'll submit a complete response. They'll have no choice but to schedule a hearing." I exhaled, tension easing just enough to let me breathe. I drove home through twilight, the city's glow soft against the gathering darkness. Every streetlight looked like a spotlight exposing my vulnerability. When I walked into my apartment, I shed my coat and sank to the floor, back against the door. My palms pressed against the cool wood as if I could stop it from closing on me. I pulled the notebook toward me, Operation Reflection, and flipped through blank pages. Each empty line seemed daunting now. My plan to expose him had shifted into one to defend myself. The notebook felt heavy. I closed it and rested my forehead on my knees, muscles trembling. A thought came unbidden: what if the hearing turned against me? What if they painted me as vindictive, unstable? The uncertainty sunk into my bones, chilling me. I pressed my hands to my temples, summoning calm. I repeated a mantra under my breath: I did what I needed. I will stand my ground. My pulse slowed, and I felt a flicker of strength rekindling. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city below. My mind drifted between fear and fierce resolve. This was more than revenge now. It was a battle for my dignity, for my right to be heard. And when the hearing came, I wouldn't be a shadow behind envelopes or anonymous emails. I would stand in the light, voice clear and unwavering. In that quiet moment before sleep, I imagined myself stepping into the hearing room, shoulders straight, hands steady, eyes unflinching. I would speak my truth and reclaim every piece of myself they tried to hold against me. The morning of the hearing comes wrapped in restless light, thin and pale against my curtains. I lie still for what feels like hours, every heartbeat hammering in my ears. My palms are damp before I even swing my legs over the side of the bed. I press my fingertips into my thighs, searching for some steadiness, some spark of courage I can hold on to. In the bathroom mirror, I study my reflection, dark circles under my eyes, jaw set so tight it aches. My throat feels raw when I swallow. I scrub my face with cold water, the shock jolting me upright, if only for a moment. My heart still thunders, but at least I can breathe. I towel off and pull on the blouse I picked last night, something neutral, professional, armor in fabric form. Emily's already pacing in the kitchen when I step inside. She hands me a paper cup of coffee, black, just the way I like it. Steam curls above my fingers. "You look ready," she says, voice soft but firm. I manage a small smile, though my lips tremble. She squeezes my shoulder before I can protest. We drive in silence through streets already hustling with weekday traffic. Every red light feels like a moment suspended, my chest tightening until the light flips green. I count breaths, in and out, until the tension loosens just enough to let me focus. At the courthouse steps, I pause. The building looms, stone columns, heavy doors, a promise of verdicts and judgments. My stomach knots, but I stand tall, shoulders back. Emily slides her hand into mine for an instant, then releases. "You've got this," she whispers. Inside, the hallways stretch on, fluorescent lights humming overhead. I clutch my folder, Lara's polished statement and exhibits, all the evidence of my pain and my reason. My fingertips graze the edges of the papers as if seeking reassurance. In the anteroom, I find a quiet corner and close my eyes, leaning against the wall's cool plaster. My breath is slow now, my pulse steadier. I let myself feel the tremor in my hands, the flutter of nerves, but I don't let them swallow me. I repeat the vow I made the night before: I will stand my ground. When the bailiff calls my name, I straighten my spine and step forward. The courtroom door swings open, revealing rows of wooden benches and a raised bench where the judge will sit. Jake is already there, stiff in his suit, eyes flicking toward me as I enter. A shock of anger flares, but I push it down, focusing instead on the path ahead. The door closes behind me with a soft thud that echoes in my chest. I take a deep breath and walk down the aisle, each step measured. This is it, the moment my truth meets their world. And I won't cower. Not now, not ever. I stepped up to the bench, every breath tasting like static. The judge peered over her glasses as I opened my folder, fingers brushing the edges of each exhibit. My heart hammered in my ears, and I pinched the fabric of my blouse to steady myself. Your Honor, I began, voice quavering, my name is Haley. I'm here to explain why I unleashed those emails and why you must understand the fallout beyond simple revenge. I held up the printed screenshot of our messages. These texts weren't just flirtation, they were midnight promises that never reached me. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the paper. I swallowed, throat tight as a knot, and forced myself on. Each time his phone lit up, I waited, believing he was telling me the truth. But the proof you see here shows otherwise. I tapped the image gently, the judge nodded for me to continue. As I laid out the timeline, voice growing firmer with each word, I felt Jake shift in his seat. His lawyer glowered, but I ignored them both. I described the dry mouth I'd woken with, the night spent replaying every denied excuse, the way my hands trembled so badly I spilled coffee on my own notes. In that room, under fluorescent lights, it felt like I was burning and freezing at once, anguish and relief tangled in my veins. Jake's attorney rose, slick and clinical. Ms. Harris, he said, voice cool, you admitted sending anonymous emails to everyone in our client's life. Isn't that a calculated act of malice, intended to humiliate? His eyes locked on mine, daring me to flinch. My stomach clenched, guilt and defiance warping my chest. I swallowed hard. I wanted him to feel how I felt, I choked out. Not to shame him, but to force him to face the choices he made. He pressed, but why involve innocent friends and family? Why not confront him alone? The question stung. I closed my eyes briefly, recalling Emily at my door, Lara guiding my words. It had never been just about hurting Jake. Because, I answered, voice low but unwavering, he hid behind my trust. He lied not just to me but in full view of everyone who cared about us. They deserved the truth too. A hush fell. I glanced at Jake, his face was pale, guilt, or was it shock? Flickering in his eyes. The pendulum of power felt like it swung toward me then away. My cheeks burned, and the judge cleared her throat. We will recess for 5 minutes, she announced. My legs threatened to give out, and I sank into the nearest chair. Emily's hand found mine under the table, her grip was steady, grounding. During the break, whispers floated around me. I closed my eyes, picturing every step that led here, the late-night discoveries, the envelopes, the USB drive, the legal preparation. I felt both predator and prey, the collision of action and consequence vibrating in my bones. My pulse slowed, settling into a rhythm that felt strong enough to carry me back to the stand. When we resumed, the judge asked Jake's attorney if he had more questions. He shook his head. Then she turned to me. Ms. Harris, thank you for your candor. We will review the full record. The words felt both final and suspended, like the moment just before a stage curtain falls. I nodded, voice caught in my throat. As I packed my folder, my hands no longer trembled. The act of speaking my truth had carved something unbreakable inside me. I stood, shoulders squared, and followed Emily out of the courtroom. The hallway lights blurred around me, and I inhaled deeply, on the edge between dread and hope. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped low, painting the stone facade gold. I pressed a hand to my chest, where my heart still beat like a drum, steady, resolute. The hearing was over for now, but the reckoning was only halfway done. Walking down those courthouse steps, I realized that the worst fracture I'd feared was already behind me. Ahead lay the final judgment, and with it, the chance to piece together whatever remained of my life. My legs felt unsteady as Emily and I stepped onto the courthouse steps, the breeze carrying the low hum of traffic far below. We didn't speak until we reached her car parked just around the corner. I sank into the passenger seat, clutching my folder like a lifeline. My chest ached with the release and still raw tension of the hearing. Emily slid behind the wheel, glancing over. "You did it," she said quietly, voice tinged with pride and relief. I nodded, but my throat felt tight. "It's not over," I reminded both of us. "Their decision still hangs out there." The weight of uncertainty pressed down again, but at least I'd faced the storm head-on. We drove through early evening traffic in silence. My thoughts drifted back to the moment the judge recessed the hearing. In that hush, I'd felt something shift inside me. The fury that drove me to expose Jake's lies had given way to something steadier, an affirmation that I deserved justice, not just revenge. His betrayal had broken me open, but it had also forced me to reclaim my own voice. Back at my apartment, I didn't bother to take off my coat. I dropped into the armchair by the window, the city lights flickering like distant promises. My folder sat on the coffee table, untouched. The audacity of my own actions still startled me, sending anonymous emails, recruiting Emily, drafting legal statements. I'd become someone I almost didn't recognize, part avenger, part advocate, entirely determined. My phone buzzed. I stared at the screen with a mix of dread and resignation. It was a text from Jake's sister. "Can we talk? Please." My thumb hovered over reply until I remembered Emily's warning, no impulsive moves. I silenced the phone and set it face down. If I started responding now, I'd lose the calm clarity I'd fought so hard to achieve. Instead, I reached for my notebook, Operation Reflection, and flipped to the page I'd left blank after closing it months ago. The margins were cruelly empty, the title mocking in its promise. For the first time, I considered writing something other than schemes of exposure. A plan for moving on. Pages filled with questions. What do I want next? How do I rebuild trust in myself? But I couldn't leap ahead yet. There were truths to unpack, feelings to process. I opened the notebook and made a fresh entry, Phase 2, Reclamation. Under it, I jotted notes, therapy referrals, calls to friends I'd pushed away, steps to reclaim the parts of me lost in the turmoil. Healing needed as much planning as revenge, I realized. A knock on the door startled me. Emily stood in the hallway, umbrella dripping onto my welcome mat. She held 2 coffees, hers black, mine with cream and sugar, just like old times. "Thought you might need this," she said, stepping inside. Her presence grounded me. I invited her to sit, and we sipped in companionable silence for a few beats. Finally, Emily cleared her throat. "I talked to Laura," she began. "She thinks the judge will rule in our favor, but it could take another week. In the meantime, Jake's attorney might file motions to delay." She paused, eyes searching mine. "He's not giving up." I closed my eyes against the tension in my chest. I'd expected no less. "Then we prepare," I said, voice firmer. I laid out a new strategy: gather character witnesses, document the emotional toll, involve my therapist in writing a statement about my psychological state. Emily nodded, grabbing her notepad. We fell into planning mode again, the quiet hum of collaboration replacing the storm of legal onslaught. We listed names, my sister, a coworker, even my old college roommate who'd seen me at my best and worst. Each name felt like a thread weaving my shattered life back together. By the time Emily left, I felt both exhausted and alive. I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, head resting on the cool wood. The hallway light cast a soft glow on my face, illuminating both the fatigue in my eyes and the hard glint of resolve. I moved to the desk and opened the folder. Scanned receipts and screenshots stared back, remnants of a war I'd waged. But beside them lay my newly jotted plans, Phase 2, Reclamation, proof that I was more than a victim or an avenger. I was someone forging a future beyond this betrayal. As I closed the folder and switched off the desk lamp, I heard the distant rumble of a late bus. The city breathed around me, indifferent yet full of possibility. Tomorrow, I'd deliver more testimony, rally my allies, and inch closer to closure. And beyond that, I'd face the hardest challenge of all, rebuilding trust in a world I no longer recognized. I slipped into bed, mind humming with plans and doubts, anticipation and dread. But as sleep claimed me, one truth crystallized: the next chapter wasn't just about contesting his lies, it was about redefining my own story. And when the sun rose, I'd begin writing it. I woke before dawn, the sky still ink black outside my window. Even with my eyes closed, I felt the familiar hum of nerves thrumming under my skin, an electric pulse that would not let me rest. My phone glowed, a reminder for today's first appointment, a therapy session I'd booked weeks ago but postponed until now. I'd told myself I needed to stay focused on the hearing, but somewhere between the envelopes and the court statements, I'd lost touch with why I'd started this in the first place: to heal. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, tension coiling in my calves. My hands felt cold and clammy as I reached for yesterday's coffee mug still half full on the nightstand. I brought it to my lips and let the warmth flow through me, chasing away some of the freeze in my chest. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and closed my eyes, tuning into my body, the ache in my lower back from sleeping tension locked, the tight knot in my throat that refused to loosen, and the soft tremor in my fingertips that reminded me I was still here, still alive. At 8, I left my apartment wearing business casual armor for the world, but under it something raw and exposed. The therapist's office was on the second floor of an old brownstone, the kind of building that smelled of wood polish and unspoken stories. In the waiting room, the ticking of a clock sounded impossibly loud. I sat on a leather chair, fingertips drumming the armrest. Across from me, a woman leafed through a magazine, but she glanced up the moment I walked in and gave me a small, understanding nod. No questions. No judgments. When my name was called, I followed my therapist, Dr. Ramos, into a sunlit room lined with books and soft pillows. She offered me tea, but I took a glass of water instead and settled into the seat opposite her. For a moment, I simply breathed, slow, steady inhales and exhales, letting the cold water slide down my throat. Then she asked, "How are you, truly?" I stared at the faint steam rising from her cup before I found my voice. Exhausted, I admitted, voice small. And afraid. The words tasted bitter on my tongue, heavy with weeks of sleepless nights and legal battles. I let my shoulders slump, the armor slipping away. I've spent all this time planning revenge, fighting for my side of the story. But I feel like I'm falling apart. Dr. Ramos listened, soft eyes patient. She guided me through naming the emotions: grief, anger, shame, relief, and we talked about how revenge had been both my weapon and my prison. By the time I left her office, an hour later, the knot in my throat had loosened into something I could breathe around. It wasn't gone, but it felt manageable. Stepping back into the city's bustle, I felt strangely lighter. I pulled out my notebook, Phase 2, Reclamation, and scribbled a note under today's date: therapy session complete. Emotions identified. Then I flipped to the next blank page and wrote, character witness emails. I drafted messages to 3 people: my sister Lily, my coworker Ben, and my college friend Maya. In each, I was honest about what had happened, apologetic for any worry I'd caused, but also clear that I was fighting for my own dignity. Hitting send, I felt a rush of connection to the people I loved, not the faceless masses I'd targeted before. By midday, I was back at my desk, reviewing Lara's latest edits to the upcoming deposition testimony. My folder was thick now: statements, exhibits, character letters trickling in as people wrote back with support and concern. Emily stopped by in the afternoon, dropping off sandwiches and a thermos of tea. We ate side by side, and for the first time in weeks, our conversation drifted away from courts and emails. We talked about memories from college road trips, inside jokes, the mundane details of life that felt like lifelines. That evening, I practiced my testimony out loud in front of the mirror. My voice shook the first few times, cracked and quavery, but with each repetition, it grew steadier. I watched my reflection, shoulders squared, chin level, eyes clear but soft with honesty. I reminded myself that this wasn't a performance for an audience of strangers, it was my story, my truth, and I deserved to tell it. When I finally crawled into bed, exhaustion washed over me like a wave. My body felt heavy, but it was a good kind of tired, earned. I turned off the bedside lamp and let my head sink into the pillow. As sleep claimed me, I carried with me a conviction I hadn't known before, that healing wasn't a destination but a series of small, steady steps, therapy, honest conversations, rehearsing my own voice. Tomorrow, I would step back into that courtroom not just as a fighter seeking justice but as a woman reclaiming herself in every word she spoke. In the pale morning light, I found myself standing outside the courthouse once more, the familiar stone facade both imposing and oddly comforting. My heart was steady now, tempered by each step I'd taken toward this moment of reckoning. The heavy wooden doors swung open with a hollow creak, and I walked up the aisle, my folder pressed against my chest, feeling the weight of every decision I'd made during those restless nights. No longer the trembling woman who slipped anonymous letters into mailboxes, I held my head high. Today wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. When the judge called the room to order, I rose from the wooden bench and approached with deliberate calm. My voice didn't waver as I delivered my final statement, the long nights of doubt that stole my sleep, the betrayal that sliced deeper than any blade, and the ache of realizing that some truths demanded radical honesty. I spoke of the tremor in my hands that spilled coffee on my desk, the dry throat that greeted each mention of his name, and the fierce certainty that I deserved my own story told aloud, in full. Jake sat under the harsh fluorescent lights, eyes fixed on me as I laid out the evidence we'd gathered, screenshots of deceptive texts, testimony from friends who'd witnessed my unraveling, and the letter I'd penned after nights spent trembling. I caught his gaze briefly and saw something I hadn't anticipated, regret and confusion tangled in his features, mingled with a faint sorrow. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge I sought, but a recognition of the hurt he'd inflicted. In that moment, a quiet vindication resonated through my bones. When I finished, the silence in the wood-paneled room felt heavy, as though the air itself had paused to listen. His attorney rose, voice sleek and clinical, attempting one last argument to cast doubt on my motives, but Lara was prepared. She spoke with clear conviction of my rights, my fears, and my raw need for accountability. She traced the arc of my journey from shock to strategy, from clandestine letters to open testimony, highlighting how I'd been fractured and then methodically pieced back together, demanding not punitive vengeance but an honest reckoning that could foster real change. Later, in a hushed voice, the judge delivered the ruling I'd hoped for, though not the punitive justice some might crave. Jake was ordered to participate in mediation, submit to individual and joint therapy if he hoped to reconcile with those he'd hurt, and provide a formal apology, both written and read aloud in a public forum. It felt strange, this blend of accountability and restoration. I felt a small spark of victory in my chest, tempered by the knowledge that true healing didn't end with a gavel's fall. Instead, it began again with fragile steps forward. Outside the courtroom doors, the bright afternoon sun seemed sharper, as if reflecting the new clarity in my mind. I found Emily waiting near the steps, her eyes bright with relief. We embraced, and I felt the tension dissolve from my shoulders in a rush. The fracture that had ripped through my life had left behind raw edges, but also a space for something different, fragile trust rebuilt, honest communication, and the promise that I would choose how to piece myself back together. I walked toward the city streets, notebook in hand, ready to fill its pages with hope instead of plans for retribution. That evening, I settled at my desk in my apartment, the city skyline glowing beyond the window like distant possibilities. I opened Phase 2, Reclamation, and titled the next chapter Beyond the Mirror. Under it, I wrote a single, resolute line: I choose myself first, above all else. My palms felt warm, my breath even, as I placed the pen down. The storm had broken, its clouds drifting away, leaving fresh air in its wake. Tomorrow, I would begin writing a life guided not by the echoes of betrayal but by the quiet strength I'd found within myself.